Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine taking one of the most complex, politically charged provisions in a nation's constitution, something really born from conflict, a historical anomaly, and then almost overnight, changing its very essence. That's our deep dive today. We're going to unravel Article 370, the provision that gave Jammu and Kashmir its special autonomous status within India. And we'll explore the profound shifts that followed its abrogation, our mission to really pull out the critical nuggets of understanding from the sources you've shared, cutting through the noise to get to what truly matters for you to be well-informed.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how a single legal article can encapsulate so much history, identity, and, well, future aspirations, too. This deep dive should help you understand not just what happened, but really why it matters. We'll try to guide you through the legal bits, the historical context, and the impact, on the ground on millions of lives. And it raises a really important question, I think. How do societies balance these historical promises with evolving national interests and the actual lived experiences of their people?
Exactly. So let's dive into the specifics. First, to really grasp the magnitude of the abrogation, we need to understand what Article 370 actually was. What was it at its core?
Right. So Article 370, it was found in Part XY of the Indian Constitution. That part's titled Temporary, Transitional, and Special Provisions, which is pretty significant itself. It basically granted a special autonomous status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, or J&K as it's often called.
Autonomous in what way? Like, what did that look like practically?
Well, it meant J&K had its own constitution, its own flag, and crucially, a significant degree of autonomy over its internal affairs. So the Indian Parliament's power to make laws for J&K was quite limited.
Limited to what specifically?
Primarily just three subjects: defense, foreign affairs, and communications.
Okay, just those three. So what about everything else, like education or health or land?
For any other subject, the central government needed what was called the concurrence of the J&K state government. And importantly, that concurrence then had to be ratified by the state's constituent assembly, not just the regular legislature initially.
The Constituent Assembly. That sounds like a specific body for a specific time.
It was, and that's a key point we'll come back to. Also vital was its link with Article 35A. You can't really talk about 370 without mentioning 35A.
Right, Article 35A. What did that do?
It flowed directly from 370, and it empowered the J&K legislature to define who counted as permanent residents of the state. And it allowed them to grant these residents special rights and privileges.
Like what kind of privileges?
Things related to owning immovable property, getting state government jobs, scholarships, stuff like that. And the flip side was that non-permanent residents were barred from these rights. They couldn't buy land, for instance.
Okay, so a very unique setup. Why? Why was such a special provision needed in the first place? What led to Article 370?
It really was a direct result of the unique circumstances around the accession of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir to India back in 1947.
Right, the end of British rule, partition. The princely states had a choice.
Exactly. Join India, join Pakistan, or try to stay independent. Maharaja Hari Singh of J&K, the ruler at the time, initially wanted independence.
But things didn't quite work out that way.
No. He faced an invasion by tribesmen from Pakistan, so he sought India's help and signed the Instrument of Accession in October 1947. But crucially, this accession was limited. He only acceded on those three subjects we mentioned: defense, foreign affairs, communications.
So Article 370 was meant to reflect that limited accession.
Precisely. And you have to remember the context. J&K was a Muslim-majority state with a Hindu ruler in the middle of a conflict. Article 370 was seen as a temporary measure, a way to provide a framework, ease the state's integration while respecting those unique political and demographic realities.
And it was about honoring that agreement, the Instrument of Accession, giving people a sense of security.
Yes, definitely. The promise of autonomy was key. It was intended to guarantee a special status, a say in their own governance, and it was genuinely meant to be temporary until the state's own constituent assembly could draft a state constitution and decide the final relationship with India.
Okay, so that's the why and what. Fast forward decades later to August 5th, 2019. A huge change. How did the government actually remove it? It sounds legally complicated.
It was a very complex legal and political maneuver. First, the government issued a presidential order, the Constitution, application to Jammu and Kashmir Order 2019. This order didn't just scrap 370 directly. It did something quite clever, or controversial, depending on your view.
What did it do?
It modified Article 367 of the Constitution. That's the interpretation clause, like the Constitution's dictionary. The modification said that the phrase constituent assembly of the state, which was mentioned in Article
The
370.
one that didn't exist anymore.
Exactly. It said that phrase should now be read as the legislative assembly of the state.
Ah, okay. But J&K was under President's rule then, wasn't it? The state assembly wasn't functioning.
Precisely the point. Under President's rule, the powers of the state's legislative assembly were vested in the Indian Parliament. So Parliament, acting as the state assembly, could then recommend to the president that Article 370 be declared inoperative.
Wow. So Parliament essentially gave itself the power to approve the change on behalf of the state.
That's the essence of the legal mechanism used, yes. And right alongside this, they passed the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act 2019.
And that's the act that changed the map.
Yes, it bifurcated or split the state of J&K into two new union territories. Jammu and Kashmir, which would have a legislature eventually, and Ladakh, without a legislature, directly under central control.
And this whole process was challenged legally, right? What did the Supreme Court say?
It was challenged, but in December 2023, the Supreme Court of India unanimously upheld the government's decision. They ruled that Article 370 was indeed a temporary provision and that the president did have the power to revoke it using the procedure followed.
Okay, so the legal framework is set. Let's shift to the impact on people. Here's where it gets really interesting, right? The before and after for the people of Kashmir. What was life like before the abrogation?
Well, as you said, J&K had its own constitution, its own flag, a separate set of laws in many areas. Central laws didn't automatically apply. Think about things like the Right to Information Act or the Right to Education Act. They weren't applicable in J&K unless the state adopted them.
So a distinct legal bubble, in a way. And you mentioned Article 35A earlier. How deeply did that affect daily life and the economy?
Very deeply. It prevented non-residents, anyone not defined as a permanent resident, from buying a movable property, getting state government jobs, or accessing certain scholarships.
So if you were from, say, Delhi or Mumbai, you just couldn't buy a house or apply for a government job there.
Correct. That was the rule under 35A. Now, proponents saw this as vital protection for the local demography and culture, keep outsiders from overwhelming the local population. But critics argued it created a sense of separatism. It discouraged outside investment, hindered economic development.
Right. And politically, the state had its own dynamics, regional parties.
Yes, a politically dominant Muslim majority, its own distinct political landscape. But the region was also, unfortunately, often plagued by instability.
What kind of instability?
Terrorism, separatist movements, frequent strikes, protests. It led to regular shutdowns. This obviously disrupted daily life massively. Schools closed, businesses shut. It was a constant reality for many.
And the economic impact of that instability combined with the Article 35A restrictions.
It meant limited economic opportunities.
Yeah.
Private investment was low, partly due to the restrictions, partly due to security concerns. Economic growth lagged behind other parts of India. And this led to significant unemployment, particularly among young people.
Okay, that paints a picture of the before. Now let's look at the after. What are the conditions like since August 2019? First, that full integration aspect.
Right. The Indian Constitution now applies fully. J&K is treated like other union territories or states in most legal respects. All central laws, those related to fundamental rights, welfare schemes like Ayushman Bharat, health insurance, educational policies, they all apply directly now.
And the big one, property and residency, with Article 35A gone.
That's arguably the most significant change on the ground. Any Indian citizen can now buy property, apply for government jobs, and settle in J&K. This is hugely contentious.
Contentious how? What are the two sides?
Well, some fear it will lead to demographic change, a dilution of Kashmiri identity and culture. They worry about outsiders buying up land and resources. Others see it as a positive step. They argue it integrates J&K fully, removes discrimination, and opens the door for much-needed economic investment and opportunity.
Another big shift is the governance structure itself, from a state to a union territory. What does that mean in practice?
It means increased central control. J&K is now directly administered by the central government through a lieutenant governor appointed by the president. Ladakh is also a union territory, but without its own legislature, so even more direct central control there.
And how has that shift been received?
Predictably, it's viewed very differently. Critics see it as a disempowerment of the local population, a loss of autonomy, even using terms like settler colonialism. They point to the fact that there hasn't been an elected state government since before the change.
And the government's perspective?
The government argues this structure was necessary for stability and development. They claim the abrogation has led to a significant improvement in the security situation. They point to data showing a decline in terrorism, stone pelting incidents, and separatist activities. There are also reports highlighted by the government of increased tourism, cinemas reopening after decades, a return to a kind of surface normalcy in daily life.
What about the economy? You mentioned lack of investment before. Has that changed?
The government strongly highlights increased investment, MOUs being signed, infrastructure projects underway, roads, power projects. And they talk about job opportunities opening up, particularly in tourism, real estate, and related sectors.
Is that translating into jobs and better livelihoods for ordinary Kashmiris yet?
That's where opinions diverge again. Critics argue that these benefits are slow to materialize for the common person. They say unemployment, especially youth unemployment, remains a major challenge despite the government's efforts and claims. And politically, as I mentioned, it's still very much a situation in flux. The state legislature remains dissolved. Elections haven't been held yet for the UT Assembly.
So a kind of political vacuum.
Some would call it that, yes. Or at least a period of increased centralization of power while the new system beds in, pending elections.
So wrapping this section up, what does it all mean right now? It sounds like the story is far from over.
Absolutely not over. The abrogation was, without doubt, a monumental and deeply controversial decision. You have the government asserting it's brought greater integration, peace, development, and then you have critics arguing it's undermined the region's autonomy, its unique identity, maybe even democratic rights. It's going to remain a subject of intense debate and close observation for years to come.
It really shows how complex these things are.
Yeah.
History, law, identity, security, development, all tangled together.
Precisely. This deep dive really highlights that, doesn't it? It's a prime example of how history, law, and just human experience intertwine. And the consequences are profound, often debated, and the long-term impact, especially on the Kashmiri people and the region's stability, is something we really need to keep watching and trying to understand.
That was a true deep dive, peeling back the layers on a constitutional provision that genuinely reshaped an entire region. As you, our listeners, reflect on this, maybe consider this thought. How do societies navigate that really difficult tension? The tension between historical promises of autonomy, maybe unique identity, and the push for national integration, security development, especially in places marked by conflict and such diverse identities. What stands out to you as the most significant ripple effect of this abrogation we've discussed today? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep getting well informed.